I was trapped in a snowstorm with my best friend's mother, she whispered. We'll need to stay warm together. Eli tightened his grip on the straps of his supply pack, feeling the sting of frostbite creeping into his fingers despite the thick gloves. The planet's atmosphere was thin, making every breath a small effort, and the blizzard reduced visibility to almost nothing. Snow swirled around them in chaotic patterns, reflecting the pale light of the distant sun. Even the sky seemed frozen, a gray-white expanse that offered no comfort. Eli, stay close, a voice called, cutting through the howling wind. It was Dr. Marin Holt, his best friend's mother. Despite her age, she moved with a surprising speed and precision, her exosuit designed for extreme cold. Her visor was fogged, but Eli could make out her determined eyes. He swallowed hard. "I'm right here," he shouted back, trying to keep his voice steady. The storm had come faster than anyone expected. One moment the plains were quiet and manageable. The next, it was like being caught inside a living ice storm, relentless and unforgiving. They had been on a supply run, checking equipment scattered across the frozen landscape for their research station. Marin had insisted on bringing Eli along, not only because he was her son's closest friend, but because she trusted him. He wasn't a trained scientist, but he had a knack for quick thinking. Right now, that skill was about to be tested. A sudden gust slammed into them, forcing Eli to crouch low, his boots sliding on the icy surface. He tried to follow Marin, but the snow was already knee-deep, making each step a struggle. "Marin!" he yelled, fearing he had lost sight of her. She was there, slightly ahead, crouched behind the twisted remains of an alien rock formation. Even in this storm, her mind was alert. "We need shelter," she shouted back. "There's something up ahead, come on." Eli fought against the wind, dragging his pack behind him. His teeth chattered involuntarily, and he noticed that his fingers had grown numb. He cursed under his breath, knowing that exposure at this temperature could be deadly. The survival protocols drilled into him since childhood in the research colony began to kick in. Keep moving, conserve energy, stay calm. The wind seemed to mock him, howling through the open plains, bending the occasional frost-covered shrub like a brittle reed. Eli could barely make out a shadow through the white haze. As they approached, he realized it was the half-buried hull of an alien research pod, long abandoned and partially frozen into the snow. Its sleek surface, coated in frost, glinted faintly under the weak sunlight. Marin was already at the entrance, brushing snow away. "Help me clear this," she called. "If we can get inside, we can avoid the worst of the storm." Eli grabbed a chunk of frozen snow and began to chip away. The storm whipped at them, tearing through their suits, but inside the pod might be their only chance. After several minutes, Marin pried open the hatch. A hiss of stale, cold air escaped, and the interior was dim but intact. "Quick, in," she urged. Eli scrambled inside, grateful for the brief respite from the wind. The pod's interior was small, barely enough for two adults, but it was a lifesaver. The walls hummed faintly, and he noticed alien markings etched into the metal. He had seen similar pods in the research logs, left by explorers from centuries ago. "Close the hatch," Marin said, shivering slightly, though her composure was unbroken. "We'll need to stay warm together." Eli hesitated at her words. There was nothing strange about the statement. She simply meant that sharing body heat in a cold environment could save them. But the quiet seriousness in her tone made his stomach tighten. Survival, not fear, was her focus. Once inside, he could finally remove his gloves and rub his hands together. Marin was already doing the same, her movements efficient and practiced. "We'll need to ration our energy and stay calm," she said, scanning the pod's interior. "There might be some old supplies left. Maybe a heating unit or some insulation materials." They searched quickly, finding a small pack of alien thermal blankets and a low-powered energy cell. The pod's internal temperature rose slightly when Marin activated it, but it was not enough to fully counter the storm outside. Eli shivered, curling into a tight ball. The cold had seeped into his bones, and the realization hit him. If they stayed outside any longer, neither of them would survive the night. As the blizzard raged, they sat in silence, broken only by the occasional sound of metal groaning under the storm's pressure. Eli watched Maren carefully. Even now, she radiated competence and calm. He had known her as a warm, intelligent woman, the mother of his closest friend, but he had never seen her like this, focused entirely on survival. "I read about these storms in the mission logs," she said finally, breaking the silence. "They can last for hours, even days. But humans have a way of surviving when other species might fail." Her voice held pride, not arrogance. Eli felt a strange warmth in her words. It wasn't just body heat, it was reassurance. How do you know we'll make it?" he asked, trying to sound brave despite his numb fingers. She smiled faintly, though the storm outside made the gesture almost invisible. "Because humans are adaptable. We find ways to survive, even in places the universe seems to forget. And because you're sitting here with me, we can make it together." Eli nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of his mind, but it was tempered by a growing sense of hope. He had always admired humans' resilience in theory. Now he was living it. Outside, the storm showed no sign of abating. Snow slammed against the pod like tiny shards of glass, and the wind's howl grew louder. But inside, the small space began to feel like a sanctuary. They huddled together, sharing warmth as Maren instructed, using the thermal blankets and rationing the limited energy cell to keep the temperature bearable. Hours passed, though it was impossible to tell with the storm raging. Eli found himself talking quietly, sharing memories of his best friend, jokes that seemed absurd against the life-threatening conditions, and hopes for the day they would return to the research station. Maren listened, sometimes laughing softly, always attentive. The pod had become more than a shelter. It was a small pocket of humanity in a frozen alien world. At one point, Eli's thoughts drifted to the alien markings on the pod walls. He traced them with his fingers, wondering about the beings who had created this place, who had once explored the same harsh plains he now faced. They had not survived, or at least, they had left no record that humans could fully understand. Yet here he was alive, learning the limits of endurance and the strength of cooperation. Maren noticed his curiosity. "Those markings," she said, pointing, "are part of a navigation system. The aliens were explorers like us in a way, but they didn't have the same survival instincts. Humans, we have something they didn't: creativity, determination, and the will to live through adversity." Eli looked at her, realizing how much truth there was in her words. This storm, deadly and indifferent, had tested them already. And yet here they were, huddled together, planning, surviving, living. Outside, the wind continued to howl and the snowstorm raged on. But inside the pod, Eli felt a spark of something stronger than fear: confidence. He knew that as long as they remained alert, resourceful, and cooperative, they had a chance to survive. And in that realization, he discovered the first lesson of the frozen plains: humans could endure almost anything. Maren glanced at him, noticing the shift in his demeanor. "Good," she said softly. "We'll need that. This storm isn't over yet." Eli nodded. He didn't feel like a boy anymore. The snowstorm had stripped away the comfort of familiarity, but it had revealed something new: the raw, unshakable strength of humans facing the impossible. And as long as he followed Maren's lead, he believed, truly believed, that they would survive this night. And so they waited, the storm outside a roaring, icy monster, and the pod inside a fragile bubble of warmth, resilience, and the unmistakable human will to endure. The snowstorm continued without mercy. Outside, Zytheria 5 plains were nothing but a white blur, the wind howling like an angry beast. Inside the small alien pod, Eli and Marin did their best to stay warm. The thermal blankets helped, but they were thin, and the pod's energy cell could only maintain a small fraction of comfort. Eli hunched closer to Marin, trying to share heat without getting in her way. The warmth of another human was surprisingly comforting, something he had never really appreciated before. His fingers were still numb, and each small movement felt like a tiny battle. "We need to make this place more livable," Marin said, her voice calm but firm. "If we just wait for the storm, we might not survive. We need to act." Eli nodded, shivering. "What can we do?" Marin looked around the pod quickly. The interior was cramped but intact. "The insulation in these walls is minimal. We can improve it with what's left here. Help me gather anything that might block the wind or retain heat." Together, they began searching the pod. They found scraps of alien material, thin sheets that shimmered faintly under the pod's dim light. Marin examined them carefully. "This stuff is flexible and lightweight. If we layer it over the walls and around the hatch, it should keep most of the wind out." Eli helped, holding sheets in place while Marin secured them. His teeth chattered the whole time, but he noticed how calm and organized she was. She didn't panic. She didn't complain. She simply acted, and it reminded him how humans could endure conditions that would defeat almost any other species. After finishing the insulation, Marin turned to the pod's small compartments. There might be old supplies left: water, food, even energy cells. "Let's check carefully." Eli opened one compartment and found a sealed container. Inside were dehydrated rations, strange but edible, designed for extreme climates. Another compartment held small vials of purified water. Marin smiled. "This is enough to keep us alive for at least a couple of days. The key is to ration carefully." They sat down to eat, the act of chewing and swallowing a strange comfort in the midst of the storm. They spoke little, both aware of the storm's deadly presence outside. Even with the pod's partial protection, they could feel the vibration of the wind against the hull. After eating, Marin gestured to the pod's small console. "These alien systems might still work. If we can access their logs, we might learn something useful about surviving out there." Eli hesitated. "Do you think we can understand them?" Marin chuckled softly. "We won't understand everything, but we can try. Humans are good at figuring things out. We can adapt faster than any alien technology, sometimes even better than the creators intended." She activated the console, and faint lights flickered to life. Lines of alien script appeared on the screen, along with images of the planet long ago. Eli leaned closer, fascinated. The images showed structures buried beneath ice, strange creatures adapted to the cold, and other explorers, some human, some alien. "These logs, they're old," Marin said. "They belong to explorers who came before us. Look at how they survived or tried to." Eli squinted at the screen. One image showed a small group of beings huddled inside a pod similar to theirs. The captions were alien symbols, but Marin's translator tool interpreted enough to make sense: heat conservation, body coordination, shelter optimization. "Humans might be the best species for survival in extreme climates," Marin said softly. "We can think, we can adapt, we can cooperate. Other species, they have their strengths, but in conditions like this, they wouldn't last." Eli shivered, not from the cold this time, but from the realization. He had thought humans were ordinary, fragile creatures. Now he was seeing firsthand how extraordinary they could be when faced with danger. The storm outside showed no mercy. The pod rocked slightly as gusts slammed into its metal hull. Eli felt fear creeping in, but he fought it down, focusing on Marin's calm movements. She seemed almost unaffected by the cold, though he knew better. Her training, her experience, and her sheer determination kept them alive. "We need to prepare in case the storm gets worse," Marin said, her eyes scanning the frozen landscape visible through the small portholes. "If the pod shifts or cracks, we'll need an escape plan." "Nothing is guaranteed." Eli swallowed hard. Escape? Where would we go? Marin traced a route on a holographic map from the pod's console. There's a shallow valley not far from here. If the storm weakens, we can try to move, but it's dangerous. The snow is deep and the winds will be brutal. We have to wait for the right moment. The two settled in again, sharing body heat, conserving energy, and keeping a careful watch on the pod systems. Time became meaningless. The storm masked day and night, and the small interior of the pod became their entire universe. Hours passed. Eli grew restless. He wanted to do something, anything. But Marin reminded him gently, every action costs energy. In these conditions, conserving energy is survival. Patience is just as important as action. As the storm raged, Eli noticed the pod itself. It had been built for exploration, but it relied on intelligent beings to make the most of it. Alone, it could provide minimal comfort. Together, humans could turn it into a lifeboat in a frozen sea. The thought filled him with awe. Humans weren't just survivors, they were creators, problem solvers, and partners in endurance. Marin noticed his gaze. "We're going to be okay," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "As long as we work together and think clearly, we can handle this. Humans have survived worse than Zytheria 5. Eli nodded, feeling a surge of determination. The storm outside was relentless, but he began to see it differently, not as an enemy but as a challenge to overcome. And humans were made to overcome challenges. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the pod. The ceiling above them shifted slightly. Eli jumped. What was that? Marin immediately moved to the source of the sound, inspecting the pod's structure. "The wind, it's putting pressure on the hull. We need to reinforce it." They worked together, using scraps of alien material, rations packs, and their limited supplies to create temporary braces. Every movement was calculated, careful, and deliberate. Eli's fingers were raw and stiff, but he ignored the pain. Survival required focus, not complaint. When they finished, Marin stepped back, assessing their work. "It's not perfect, but it should hold for a while. We need to monitor it constantly. Humans can endure, but we also need to respect the environment." Eli looked at her in admiration. "You're amazing," he said. "I don't think I could have done any of this on my own." Marin smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "It's not about being amazing, it's about doing what's necessary. Humans survive by thinking, adapting, and supporting each other. You're learning that now." They settled back, exhaustion creeping over them. The storm continued, but inside the pod they were not helpless. They had supplies, shelter, and most importantly, each other. Eli realized that humans' greatest strength was not technology, not weapons, not numbers. It was their minds, their determination, and their willingness to cooperate when the world seemed determined to crush them. As they drifted into a restless sleep, the pod creaked under the weight of the storm. Eli felt a strange pride. He was cold, tired, and uncertain, but he also felt alive in a way he had never experienced. The storm was powerful, but humans were more powerful still, through ingenuity, courage, and trust. And for the first time, he truly understood Marin's words. "We'll need to stay warm together." Not just physically. Together, they could survive, think, and adapt. Together, they could endure the impossible. Outside, Zytheria 5 howled. But inside the pod, two humans huddled, learning the first hard lesson of the frozen plains. Survival was not just about strength. It was about intelligence, cooperation, and the indomitable human spirit. And so, as the storm continued into the night, Eli and Marin prepared for the challenges ahead, unaware that the pod held secrets from the past that might just help them survive, and teach them that humans were extraordinary, even in a universe full of unknown dangers. The storm had finally shown a slight sign of weakening. The howl of the wind outside was still fierce, but the blinding white had thinned to a ghostly gray haze. Inside the pod, Eli and Marin were no longer just focused on immediate survival. They had begun to notice other things. The strange markings on the walls, the alien systems humming faintly beneath the ice, and the mystery of who had once used this place. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, rubbing his hands to restore warmth. He glanced at Marin, who was examining the pod's console with an intensity that made her seem almost superhuman. "Do you think this pod belonged to explorers?" he asked, curiosity overriding his exhaustion. Marin looked up, her eyes bright with fascination. "It had to. Look at the design, the compartments, even the systems. Nothing here is meant for casual use. Someone or something planned for extreme survival." She tapped on the console and the screen flickered. Lines of alien script scrolled past, followed by images. Eli leaned closer, trying to make sense of the symbols. "Do you understand any of it?" he asked. "Some," Marin replied, adjusting a translator tool. "Enough to know that these explorers had methods for surviving the cold, and they experimented with energy transfer, insulation, and heat conservation. They were brilliant, but they didn't last long in this environment." Eli frowned. "Why not?" "They had pods like this, supplies, maybe even technology we don't understand." Marin shook her head. "Because they relied too much on technology and not enough on adaptability. They didn't think like humans do. We survive not because we have the best tools, but because we can invent, adapt, and cooperate when everything seems impossible." Eli looked around the pod. He realized she was right. They had very little here. A thin energy cell, scraps of alien material, a few rations. But with clever thinking, they had created insulation, shared warmth, and reinforced the structure. Humans had a way of surviving that went beyond equipment. Marin pointed to a section of the console labeled Thermal Optimization Module. "If we can activate this, it might boost the pod's internal temperature. But it requires coordinated effort, adjusting multiple systems at once. Think you can help?" Eli nodded eagerly. He wanted to do something, anything, to contribute. Together, they followed Marin's instructions, pressing buttons, sliding panels, and carefully monitoring energy levels. The pod hummed and shivered under the strain, and Eli realized that even the smallest action could have a big effect. After several tense minutes, the temperature inside the pod began to rise, just enough to stop the creeping frost from forming on their suits. Eli sighed in relief. "It's working," he exclaimed. Marin smiled. "It's not just the pod, it's us. We understood the problem and adapted. That's human strength, thinking, analyzing, cooperating." For a while they rested. The storm had weakened, but it wasn't over. Every gust of wind reminded them of the frozen plains outside, a harsh warning that Zytheria 5 was still a dangerous place. But inside the pod, they felt something almost alien themselves: safety. Eli's curiosity returned. He moved to a small compartment near the floor, one that Marin hadn't checked yet. Inside, he found something unexpected: a set of strange cylindrical devices glowing faintly. "Marin, look at this." Marin hurried over, adjusting her visor. "Where did you find that?" she asked. "Down here in this compartment," Eli replied. "They're glowing, but I don't know what they do." Marin examined the cylinders. "These could be old energy modules or some kind of alien heat source. If we use them carefully, they might give us extra warmth. But we need to be careful, they could be volatile." Eli felt a surge of excitement. "So we can survive even longer." "Yes," Marin said, "if we use them wisely. Humans don't just endure, we figure things out. That's why we survive where others fail." Together, they carefully activated one module. A soft warmth spread through the pod, stronger than the energy cell alone. Eli rubbed his hands, feeling real heat for the first time since the storm began. Marin adjusted a panel, channeling the energy to reinforce the insulated areas. "This is amazing," Eli said. "I can actually feel the difference." Marin nodded. "It's simple physics, but it's about understanding the environment. Humans are remarkable because we don't just react, we learn, we plan, we adapt." As they worked, Eli's attention wandered to the markings on the walls of the pod. They were intricate, almost artistic, with patterns he had never seen before. "Do you think these are decorative or?" Marin shook her head. "They're functional. Navigation, energy flow, maybe even survival protocols. The creators of this pod embedded information into the walls. You just need to understand how to read it. And humans were very good at decoding patterns." Eli leaned closer, tracing a line with his finger. Suddenly, a faint panel slid open, revealing a small chamber filled with more alien supplies. Rations, thermal packs, and even a tiny toolkit enough to reinforce the pod further. Marin gasped softly. "You found it. This could extend our survival by days, maybe a week. We'll need to ration carefully, but this is a gift from the past." Eli smiled. Despite the exhaustion, the cold, and the storm, he felt a surge of hope. Humans had a way of turning even a desperate situation into an opportunity. "Eli," Marin said, her voice serious, "look around you. Everything in this pod was designed for survival, but only the clever, adaptable, and cooperative survive here. And right now, that's us." Eli felt pride swell in his chest. He had never thought of himself as particularly resourceful, but under Marin's guidance, he had already helped improve their chances of survival. Together, they were turning a fragile pod into a lifeboat. The storm outside was still unpredictable. One moment it seemed to abate, the next, a gust slammed into the hull with enough force to make them stumble. Eli realized that even with all their cleverness, Zytheria 5 remained dangerous. "We need to prepare for a possible breach," Marin said. "If the pod structure fails, we must have a backup plan. Humans survive not because everything is perfect, but because we can improvise." Eli nodded. "Improvising, like when we reinforced the hull with the alien sheets." "Exactly," Marin replied. "And now we have more tools, more knowledge. If anything goes wrong, we can respond. Humans are designed to endure extremes physically and mentally. The storm outside tests that, but we are stronger than it seems." Hours passed. The two huddled together near the glowing cylinders, sharing heat and conserving energy. The pod felt smaller now, but somehow safer. Every system they activated, every scrap of material they used, every ration they saved, became a symbol of human ingenuity. Eli thought of the explorers whose logs they had seen earlier. They had technology, supplies, and perhaps even intelligence, but without human creativity they had failed. Humans did not merely survive with tools, they survived with mind, heart, and cooperation. Marin noticed Eli's reflective mood. "Thinking about the past?" she asked. Eli nodded. "Yeah, the explorers, they didn't make it, but we will." Marin smiled softly. "And why is that?" "Because we're human," Eli said almost instinctively. "We adapt, we cooperate. We find a way when there seems to be no way." "Exactly," Marin said. "That is why humans endure. Not luck, not tools us. Our minds, our hearts, our will. And right now, that will is keeping us alive." The storm had begun to fade slightly, though the wind still raged. Marin used the console to analyze the landscape outside, searching for signs of safer ground. The pod's sensors detected a shallow valley a few kilometers away, partially shielded by rock formations. It could be their next destination once the storm fully subsided. Eli shivered at the thought of moving through the storm, but he trusted Marin's judgment. "We'll make it," she said, reading his expression. "Humans endure extremes, and we do it together." As night fell, or at least, what passed for night on a planet where storms masked the sun, Eli and Marin rested. They shared warmth, monitored the pod, and made mental plans for the journey ahead. Every movement, every thought, every decision reinforced the truth they were living. Humans could survive even the most extreme, alien conditions if they applied their intelligence, creativity, and cooperation. And in the quiet moments, Eli realized something profound. Survival wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and cooperative. Humans had evolved not just to survive nature, but to overcome it in ways nothing else could. Outside, Zytheria 5 remained harsh and unforgiving. Inside the pod, two humans had found warmth, safety, and hope. Together, they were learning lessons not just of survival, but of what it meant to be human in a universe that tested every limit. The storm might still rage, but the spark of human resilience burned brighter inside the pod than any alien energy source. And as Eli drifted into a restless sleep, he knew one thing for certain. No matter what Zytheria 5 threw at them, humans had the power to endure and to thrive. The storm outside had returned with renewed fury. Zytheria 5 plains, once a swirling white blur, had become a wall of ice and snow that rattled the pod with every gust. Eli shivered, feeling the cold creep into his bones again. Even with the alien energy modules glowing and the thermal blankets wrapped around him, the pod felt fragile under the relentless assault. Marin crouched near the console, monitoring the pod's structural integrity. "The hull is holding, but just barely," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp with focus. "We need to prepare for anything. If the storm worsens, we might face a partial collapse." Eli's stomach tightened. "A collapse? How bad could it be?" "Bad," Marin replied simply. "The metal can bend, panels can crack. If we're trapped, survival depends on how fast and clever we can be. Humans endure because we adapt and we work together. That's our advantage." Eli nodded, determination replacing fear. He had seen Marin's resourcefulness in action before, and now it was his turn to contribute. He moved to help reinforce the pod, stacking supplies against weak panels and securing them with strips of alien insulation. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and exhausting in the cold, but every action counted. Minutes later, a loud groan echoed through the pod. A panel above them bent slightly under the force of the wind. Eli froze. Marin calmly reached up and pushed it back into place, then turned to him. "See, humans survive by acting, not panicking. Now we reinforce it more permanently." They worked together, improvising braces from the alien materials and their limited tools. The pod creaked and shifted with the storm, but the braces held. Eli marveled at how human ingenuity could transform fragile equipment into a lifeboat capable of withstanding a near-apocalyptic storm. As they labored, Marin noticed the energy modules glowing brighter. "Good," she said. "They're responding to our adjustments. The heat is stabilizing parts of the pod, but we can't rely on them alone. Humans endure because we use everything at our disposal: brains, hands, and cooperation." Hours passed. The wind's fury showed no signs of letting up, but inside the pod, Eli felt a sense of controlled focus. He moved like an extension of Marin's strategy, passing materials, adjusting braces, and checking for weak points. Every small success, every panel reinforced, every section insulated, was a victory in the war against the storm. Then the pod shook violently. A loud crack echoed above them and a sliver of frost fell from the ceiling. Eli's heart raced. "Marin, it's—" "Stay calm," she shouted, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We've prepared for this. Let's work quickly." Using every scrap of ingenuity they had, they reinforced the ceiling further, distributing weight and stabilizing the pod. Marin's hands moved with precision, Eli's with growing confidence. For the first time, he realized that human resilience wasn't just about endurance. It was about cleverness, speed, and cooperation under extreme pressure. After the immediate danger passed, they sat back, breathing heavily. Eli's face was flushed with exertion and adrenaline. "I didn't know we could do all that," he said, still amazed. Marin smiled, though fatigue showed in her posture. "That's the thing about humans. When survival is on the line, we find solutions we didn't know we had. We endure, we adapt, we survive together." Eli glanced at the pod's console, which still hummed faintly. "Do you think we could use the alien systems more? Maybe to find a safer place?" Marin nodded. "Exactly. Humans are problem solvers. The storm is dangerous, but if we understand our tools and environment, we can use it to our advantage. They examined the console carefully, deciphering more of the alien data. Among the old explorer logs, they found maps of the surrounding terrain and patterns of frequent storms. One section showed a shallow valley partially shielded by large rock formations. It could be their next destination once the storm weakened enough. "Do you think we can make it there?" Eli asked, concern etched on his face. Marin studied the data. "It's risky, but humans are built for risk. We analyze, adapt, and execute. We'll wait for the storm's weakest moment, then move carefully." That's how humans endure extreme conditions. While they prepared, Eli's attention wandered to the alien markings etched into the pod walls. Some of them appeared to be part of a thermal regulation system. "Marin, do you think these could help with the sealing?" he asked. She examined them. "Possibly. If we can channel energy through these conduits, it might reinforce structural points. It's worth a try. Humans survive because we experiment carefully, using logic and observation." Together, they activated the conduits, rerouting energy to weak points in the pod. A faint hum filled the space as the metal glowed slightly under the alien technology. The braces they had built earlier now worked in conjunction with this energy, stabilizing the pod against even the strongest gusts. Eli's amazement grew. "It's incredible. Even with so little, we can survive because we think and cooperate." Marin smiled, brushing snow from her visor. "Exactly. Other species might have technology, but humans have creativity, adaptability, and willpower. That's why we endure where others fail." Suddenly, a loud alarm echoed from the console, a warning that a section of the pod's hull was under extreme pressure. Eli froze, but Marin immediately took charge. "We need to brace it further, quickly." Using every available supply, thermal blankets, rations, and alien panels, they reinforced the stress section. Their hands moved in sync, their minds focused entirely on solving the problem. Every moment counted. Hesitation could mean disaster. After what felt like an eternity, the warning stopped. The pod had held. Eli's chest heaved with relief. "We did it," he said, disbelief in his voice. Marin nodded, eyes scanning the pod. "Humans survive because we never give up, even when everything seems against us. That's what makes us extraordinary." Hours turned into what seemed like a day. The storm's fury gradually diminished, leaving a faint gray haze over the frozen plains. The pod systems were stable, the hull reinforced, and their supplies organized for the journey ahead. Marin used the console to track the storm's pattern. "The worst is over," she said, relief evident in her tone. "Soon we can move to the valley. It's safer, partially shielded, and should offer better protection if another storm hits." Eli stretched his stiff limbs. "I can't believe we survived all that. I thought we'd never make it." Marin chuckled softly. "You underestimated humans, and that's okay. We all do at first. But now you see what humans are capable of. Not just strength, but thinking, adapting, and cooperating. That's why we endure." They packed the pod carefully, securing supplies, energy modules, and any remaining insulation. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but the storm had taught them valuable lessons. Humans survived not by chance, but by intelligence, courage, and collaboration. Eli felt a sense of pride and confidence he had never known before. The storm had tested them, pushed them to their limits, but they had endured. Humans were remarkable, not because of technology alone, but because of the mind, the heart, and the will to survive. As they prepared to leave, Marin glanced at him. "Remember this, Eli. Every challenge we face, every storm, every obstacle, it's a test of human resilience. We endure, we adapt, and we survive. That's what makes us strong." Eli nodded, understanding. Together, they stepped out of the pod into the gray haze of Zytheria 5. The plains were still harsh, but their path to the valley was visible. Each step was careful, deliberate, but with newfound confidence. Humans endured extremes because they could think, adapt, and act together. And as they moved across the frozen landscape, Eli realized that no matter what dangers awaited, humans had a spark that nothing could extinguish. The storm had tested them, but they had survived. Together, they could face anything. The storm was over for now, but the frozen plains still held challenges. Yet Eli felt certain of one thing: humans could endure anything, as long as they relied on intelligence, courage, and cooperation. And in the silence after the storm, as snow swirled gently around them, Eli and Marin walked toward the valley, a testament to human endurance, ingenuity, and the unbreakable spirit that allowed them to survive where others might fail. The gray haze over Zytheria, 5 frozen plains, began to thin as Eli and Marin carefully made their way toward the shallow valley. Each step was measured, deliberate, because the ice beneath them could be treacherous, and the wind, though calmer, still bit sharply at their exposed skin. The pod, left behind as a temporary shelter, had protected them through the storm, but it could not take them all the way. Eli's legs ached, and his fingers were still stiff despite the heat from their energy modules. Yet there was a strange exhilaration in the air. They had endured the worst the planet could throw at them so far, and now, step by step, they moved toward a new chance at survival. Marin led the way, scanning the terrain with a trained eye. "Stay close," she said, her voice steady. "We need to use every bit of natural cover. The valley's rocks will shield us from any sudden gusts." Eli nodded, grateful for her guidance. The lessons from the pod had been clear. Humans survive by thinking ahead, adapting, and cooperating. Now he was seeing the same lessons in practice. Every choice mattered. Every movement was part of a strategy. As they approached the valley, Eli noticed the ice glinting differently. Here, the wind had carved unusual formations into the frozen ground, sharp ridges and smooth sheets of ice, almost like nature itself had sculpted barriers. Marin paused, pointing to a cluster of large rocks partially buried in snow. "That will give us some shelter," she said. "We can rest there, recover, and plan the next step." Reaching the rocks, they took cover. Eli sank against the icy surface, exhaustion weighing on him, but Marin knelt beside him, checking their supplies and equipment. "We made it this far," she said, almost to herself. "Humans endure, humans adapt, and humans never stop when survival is on the line." Eli glanced around, the valley providing a natural shield from the remaining gusts. It wasn't a safe haven, but it was better than the open plains. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, appreciating the relative calm. "We need to rest," Marin continued, pulling out their remaining energy modules. "Even for a short time. Exhaustion can kill faster than cold, and we need full strength for the next leg." Eli settled close to her, sharing warmth again. He thought about everything they had endured: the storm, the fragile pod, the moments when the hull groaned ominously overhead. Every challenge had forced them to improvise, to think creatively, and to act decisively. He realized that it wasn't just luck that had kept them alive. It was human ingenuity, resilience, and teamwork. As they rested, Marin reviewed the alien logs they had salvaged from the pod. The images of long-gone explorers and their attempts at survival reminded Eli of how fragile life could be in the universe. The aliens had impressive technology, but without adaptability they had perished. Humans, however, had survived against far worse odds, partly because they could imagine solutions, learn quickly, and support each other when the stakes were high. Eli looked at Marin. "You think we'll make it back to the station?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "We will. We have to, but not just because of luck or supplies. It's because humans endure when other species might fail. We're creative, resourceful, and persistent. That's why we survive. That's why we endure." The sun, faint through the haze, reflected off the ice, casting a soft glow over the valley. It was a small reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there was beauty to be found. Eli felt a sense of awe. He had learned that survival wasn't just about braving the storm, it was about seeing opportunities, understanding the environment, and trusting oneself and others to endure. After a brief rest, Marin stood, signaling that it was time to move again. "We can't stay here too long," she said. "Even sheltered, the valley won't protect us indefinitely. We need to reach the base before the next storm cycle begins." Eli pushed himself up, fatigue weighing heavily on him. Step by step, they made their way deeper into the valley. The journey was slow, each step requiring careful balance, but every movement reinforced a powerful truth. Humans endure extremes not because they are invincible, but because they are adaptable, intelligent, and willing to cooperate. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the icy plains. Eli felt cold seeping in again, but the shared warmth with Marin, combined with their energy modules, kept them from succumbing. Each step forward was a reminder that endurance came from persistence, ingenuity, and human spirit. Suddenly, they spotted movement ahead, a faint light flickering against the snow. Eli's heart leapt. "Marin, do you see that?" She squinted. "Yes, that's the base's signal beacon." "We're close." Relief flooded Eli, but Marin remained focused. "It's not over yet," she reminded him. "The terrain can be tricky. Ice can give way, hidden crevasses or loose rocks can be deadly. We stay alert." They proceeded cautiously, step by step, toward the beacon. Each movement reinforced the lessons they had learned in the pod: careful observation, cautious experimentation, and cooperation under pressure. Even small errors could have been fatal, but their teamwork, sharpened by the storm, made them efficient and alert. Finally, they reached the edge of the base's perimeter. The lights of the station glowed warmly against the snow, promising safety, warmth, and rest. Eli let out a deep breath, relief washing over him. They had survived a storm that could have killed them, and it wasn't luck that had kept them alive. It was human ingenuity and cooperation. As they entered the base, a group of scientists and engineers rushed forward to meet them, concern etched on their faces. "Eli, Dr. Holt." "Are you okay?" one of them asked. "We're fine," Marin said calmly, though her eyes reflected exhaustion. "The storm was severe, but we adapted and endured. Humans survive when others might fail, not because of luck, but because we think, plan, and work together." Eli smiled, feeling a sense of pride. He had seen it firsthand. Human endurance was not about technology alone, nor strength alone. It was about intelligence, creativity, and cooperation in the face of overwhelming odds. Later, as they warmed themselves in the base's communal area, Eli reflected on the experience. The storm, the fragile pod, the energy modules, and the alien logs had all been tests. And humans had passed, not because they were invincible, but because they were capable of extraordinary things when survival depended on it. Marin noticed his thoughtful expression. "You've learned the most important lesson of all," she said softly. "Humans endure because we adapt, cooperate, and never give up, even when everything seems lost. That's what makes us remarkable." Eli nodded. "I understand now. It's not just surviving. It's thinking, creating, and trusting each other. That's what makes humans human." Marin smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Exactly. And remember this, Eli. No matter how harsh the world or universe might be, humans have the power to endure and thrive. It's in our nature." Outside, Zytheria 5 plains stretched endlessly, a frozen world still dangerous and unforgiving. But inside the base, Eli and Marin shared warmth, safety, and the satisfaction of surviving against impossible odds. The storm had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and revealed the essence of human endurance. Eli thought of the explorers in the alien logs, whose technology had failed without human adaptability. He realized that the true strength of humanity was not in the tools they created, but in the minds and hearts behind them. Humans could endure, adapt, and thrive because they were clever, resilient, and cooperative in ways nothing else in the universe could match. As night fell over the base, Eli looked out at the frozen plains once more. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained. Humans were not ordinary. They were extraordinary. In the harshest environments, against the cruelest forces, humans could survive and even flourish because they relied on intelligence, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. Marin sat beside him, exhausted but alert. "We made it," she said softly. "And this is only one of countless challenges we'll face. But as long as we remember who we are, humans endure." Eli smiled, warmth spreading through him, not just from the modules or blankets, but from understanding. Together, they had survived the storm. Together, they had learned the power of human ingenuity, cooperation, and resilience. The universe outside remained vast, frozen, and unpredictable, but Eli knew one undeniable truth. Wherever humans went, no matter the danger, they could endure. They could survive. They could thrive. And that, he realized, was the most extraordinary thing of all.